DC has yet another victim of the Republican trifecta in the House, Senate and White House. The famed Black Lives Matter Plaza, which you see there, is set to be painted over after a GOP lawmaker threatened funding cuts, according to plans announced by Mayor Muriel Bowser on Tuesday.
Republican Georgia Congressman Andrew Clyde introduced the legislation Monday. He's vowing to strip D.C. of millions in transportation funding if the mural is not renamed Liberty Plaza.
The plaza was constructed 1 block away from the White House during the racial justice protests in 2020 that followed the murder of George Floyd. Bowser said in a statement, "The mural inspired millions of people and helped our city through a very painful period. But now we can't afford to be distracted by meaningless congressional interference." The bill comes after other legislation had been introduced recently to repeal DC's autonomous government known as Home Rule. Those efforts come against a backdrop of ongoing efforts to achieve DC statehood, something which would, of course, secure voting representation in Congress. This may be one that we disagree on, I suspect, but maybe not. I think that, to my mind, it is an attempt to, in this case successfully, intimidate the mayor of the District of Columbia out of that street being there, having the name it has, having the on-street mural that it does, that, to my mind, marked a very disgraceful episode in terms of George Floyd being murdered. And I thought that it was a shame that Congressman Clyde wished to weaponize funding for that purpose. I understand why Muriel Bowser has decided that it is in the greater good to accede to that request, but I thought it was a shame.
Well, when George Floyd died from complications related to fentanyl, I don't think that Black Lives Matter Plaza and painting the street yellow outside of the White House materially improved conditions in Washington, D.C.
There were two autopsies done on George Floyd, both of which reported that the primary cause of his death was restraint and neck compression.
Then why is there no damage to his pipe?
Caused by a police officer kneeling on his neck. Furthermore, when that case went to trial, as you're well aware, a jury of 12 people, 6 of whom were white, 4 of whom were black, 2 of whom were multiracial, found that officer guilty on all the charges that he faced. Later, he was charged in a federal case, as you also know, and took a plea deal. And in that plea agreement, he acknowledged that he had willfully violated Mr. Floyd's constitutional right to be free from an officer's use of unreasonable force, and that he, quote, held his left knee across Mr. Floyd's neck, back and shoulder, and his right knee on Mr. Floyd's back and arm, and goes on from there.
And the same autopsy doesn't show damage to the windpipe, indicating that this was a really politically charged case that swept the country. And I know that he was convicted. He also pled guilty. And I think he did that so that he could get the most favorable treatment for hopes of one day a future pardon, which now is being discussed again. But there has been, and I do want to kind of pivot back to the BLM road, because Muriel Bowser is trying to avoid a clash with the Trump administration over home rule. And I think she is taking the L on Black Lives Matter Plaza and just going, all right, we're not going to fight you on this so that you don't fight us on that bigger thing that we would like to have independent rule. But I mean, this is right outside the White House. You know, this is something that is of interest to whoever occupies Pennsylvania Avenue. And there's no need for this to remain. And if it's called Liberty Plaza and it's interesting to tourists, that's a win for the city.
The idea that there's no need for it to exist, I mean, one could make that argument expansively about almost anything. I don't have to hand exactly the breakdown of the presidential vote in the District of Columbia last time around, but it is always the most democratic constituency, I guess we should say, since it's not a state, typically around 90%. So I would extrapolate from that a majority of citizens are supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement and would have no objection to that street remaining as it is. I do think, and I don't want to deny the fact that Bowser has a difficult dilemma to balance because of the nature of the District of Columbia and the federal government's influence over it and influence over its finances, or over its economy, perhaps would be a better way of putting it. There are genuine concerns there, but I think that it is unfortunate that she's having to bow in this case.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel a little bit more for the artist who actually did the work. Her name's Kiana Jones, and she gave an interview to local media, which I thought was really lovely. She spoke to cameras and spoke to a couple journalists, and her air of gratitude and pleasure that she got to participate at all, I thought was actually really charming, came across well. She was incredibly gracious for the opportunity to have done it at all, and just no air of resentment or anger about now that it's going to be going away. She said exactly the same thing that Bowser did, which was, we have some bigger things that we need to focus on than this. And I think that that's relatively graceful, but again, I just kind of go back to the performative nature of democratic politics versus substantive issues. And the murder rate in this country, not country, city, as it has risen since 2020. Deaths in Washington, D.C., and they are largely happening in the Black communities of D.C., have only gone up since 2020, with a minor decrease in 2024, which still keeps it on par with where we were at 2020. Material improvements to people's lives are always going to be superior over waving flags, posting banners, and painting yellow letters onto a street. That is what government should be focused on, is improving people's well-being.
The two aren't mutually exclusive, though, I think you would acknowledge. Well, they're not in practice. There is no reason why they should be mutually exclusive. It is absolutely valid to make symbolic points of important issues and to address the material concerns of people. I lived for a period in southeast DC, which is in Anacostia actually, which is the poorest ward in the District of Columbia. Yeah. It is the effects of poverty and the concomitants of poverty in that particular area are very evident on a day-to-day basis. And of course, a material improvement in that community and in the lives of the people in that community will always be important. And I do think, to your credit, that it is important to address the roots on which not just crime but all kinds of dysfunction emerges, or the roots that fuel so many of these difficulties. But I do not think that the point of whether you delete or paint over a Black Lives Matter plaza is neither here nor there in that respect.
And I think conversely, you could argue that that is just another layer of performative politics. Republicans come in and they extract all of these symbolic wins where they are going to relitigate everything that happened in 2020. And you are going to see that very much, I think, as the campaign around Derek Chauvin picks up. And at some point, the White House is going to respond.
And we will.
And that's going to be the more substantive matter that I think drives a lot of discussion.
And we will be on vigorously different sides of that question, it sounds like. In any event, we have a little bit left on Rising, so stick with us for a final segment.